The 1975 AT&T and New York Telephone Company fire was one of the most catastrophic incidents to happen in New York City. The setting is the East Village in Manhattan in the middle of a harsh winter in 1975. A major telephone company building located at 2nd Avenue and 13th Street erupts into flames and burns for more than 28 hours. For members of New York's legendary FDNY, it was one of the most catastrophic fires until the events of September 11, 2001. Most every firefighter who responded that day came down with significant illnesses and cancers due to the toxins they were faced with while responding to the call. On this episode, we are going to hear the story of one of the telephone company workers who showed up on the scene as the fire was raging. Here's my conversation with Tommy Steed. Tommy, thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
So, for everybody who's listening, I want to take you back to February 1975 when the famous 2nd Avenue fire occurred in Manhattan. And Tommy, you were there. And we want to know how long you were there for, what your story is. Let's hear it.
Well, in February 75, I was a fourth-year apprentice cable splicer working out of Bronx Construction. This was also where Ivan Ike Seidenberg started his career, Bronx Construction. I was in a non-typical gang in that we didn't have any engineered work. We were called a demolition gang, as at that time in the mid-'70s, along with Bedford-Stuyvesant and Brooklyn, Harlem, the South Bronx was experiencing massive arson fires. We were also experiencing what we call cut and steals, where the vandals... So I was on one of these major failures when my boss, Paul Brady, appeared at 10 o'clock, and I was shocked when he said, "Shut it down, pack it up, we're moving." And I said, "Boss, this is a major failure. We've never done this before." He says, "We're going to a major failure. The 13th Street building's on fire. Get down there right away. Don't dilly-dally. Hurry." So we packed it up. We went over the 3rd Avenue Bridge into Manhattan, and this was the first time I ever left the Bronx. And when I got down to the fire, I was standing across the street on 2nd Avenue with my boss. The fire department was attacking the fire from ladder trucks with streams of water. And I mentioned to my boss in kind of a sarcastic way, "Well, you told me to hurry. Now what do you want me to hurry up and do?" And he said, "Well, let's wait for the fire department to put out the fire." But in the meantime...
that wasn't in your job description.
Yeah. In the meantime, he said, "Pull that manhole cover across the street, check it for gas, ventilate it, pump the water out, and let's make ready for the task that will be ensuing shortly." Now, the fire was declared under control in 17 hours. However, it wasn't fully extinguished for 28 hours, so it burned into the next morning. And we weren't allowed in the building right away because now the vault was like the cable vault, which was a sub-basement, was like a concrete swimming pool full of water. So we had 4-inch pumps going, pumping out the water. I remember immediately Empire City, which was a subsidy of New York Telephone. They were responsible for laying all the underground ductworks and excavation in New York City, came and began jackhammering the sidewalk in front of the 13th on 2nd Avenue in front of the 13th Street building. And they excavated down 20 feet to expose the ducts entering through the foundation of the building. Now, this facilitated pulling all the dead cable out and eventually clearing all the ductwork so the line trucks could back up the new cable reels and start them rolling the cable into the cable vault. The cable vault, when I got in it, I was in about 10, 12 inches of water. Everything was completely black. Everything was completely charred. The Everything burnt except the copper. The copper itself did not burn, but it was all black, and basically we had to gut the entire vault, remove everything, cut and remove everything out of the vault to clear the way for the new cable. The following day, like I said, my boss was quite used to fire jobs in the South Bronx. I was following him, and we walked past the coin booth on 2nd Avenue and 13th Street, the public coin booth. Somebody was talking on the phone. And he stopped, and he turned around, and he said, as soon as they get off that phone, take the pedestal off the bottom of the pay telephone, splice inside wire up, run it across the sidewalk, through the window, down to the vault, to my desk. Now, his desk was a makeshift desk. It was an old wooden empty cable reel turned on its side. So he screwed a jack into the top of it, spade tipped a desk set into it, and it was the first working line in the 13th Street building. Now, we didn't restore that service. We commandeered it. And I remember that evening, Vice President Lee Oberst came down to the vault. He looked like he had a really rough day. He looked like he was pretty tired and beat. And he said, Paul, I'm going home. Is it okay if I use your phone to call my wife to see if she needs me to pick up a loaf of bread or a quart of milk? And, of course, we were really proud that we had the only working line in the building for many weeks after that. This was the only working line in the building. Now, after a few days, things became less chaotic and more organized. And while we were gutting out the vault, we had welders up on the first floor, and they were torching the frame, and they were also cutting out the subscriber frames and switches on the 5th floor. Now, they were hoisting these pieces of metal out through the window because we had a crane on 13th Street, 13th Street, and the crane was lowering the metal pieces into these large dumpsters that were placed on the ground. After that, we kind of got our permanent assignments. And I was assigned to the first manhole going north on 14th Street and 2nd Avenue. And I was kind of grateful because the air inside the building was permeated with the smell of burnt plastic. And I was out in the fresh air, so I was grateful for that. We worked from noon to midnight, 12 on, 12 off. We had to leave the Bronx. We had to drive our own personal cars down to the manhole. So we had to leave before 11 a.m. And luckily, Consolidated Edison had a massive facility on East 15th Street by the East River. And they allowed New York Telephone employees to park our personal vehicles in their parking lot, which was a big help. Because now all we had to do was walk over about 4 blocks to the work area, but we had to carry our personal protective equipment, our PPE, our hard hats, our safety glasses, gloves, rain gear, to and from the work site every day because there was no storage facilities available. Now, typically we would come in and tied to the guardrail at the manhole were ends of cables sticking up in the air. And our master splicer was a man named Sean Lakes. He was always the first one into the hole. And he would go all the way to the bottom of the hole, and he would tell us what cables to lower down to him on ropes. He would set up a splice, strip the sheathing off, put a pick-a-bond splicing machine on it, put an extension board up for the splicer to sit on, and then he would move up 6 feet in the manhole and do the same thing. So eventually, he had a ladder of extension boards and splicers going vertically, climbing from the bottom of the manhole to the top of the manhole. Now, we were working out of a tool cart, and it didn't provide too much protection from the elements. So We set up a makeshift frame and we covered them with 10 by 12 yellow tarps to keep out the weather and other elements. And, my job at the top of the hole was to keep the manhole pumps going, keep the ventilation going, test for gas every 30 minutes. And
it was just constant working all the time.
Yeah, and provide whatever the guys in the hole needed. That was what I was ordered to do. So one evening, now don't forget, in February it got dark pretty early.
Right.
And one evening, out of the blue, a distinguishedly dressed man in an impeccable suit and overcoat came through the tarp opening into my work area, and his hard hat said VP Schuster. It was Vice President Howard Schuster. The guys in the hole didn't have a clue he was on top of the hole, but he looked down and saw everybody working, and he seemed very pleased, and he asked me, how's it going? And I said, well, we're up and running really well now, Mr. Schuster. We got everything under control. And he said to me, I wish I could help you some way, but in my position, he couldn't. But I said, well, wait a minute, Mr. Schuster. In about 1 hour, the guys are going to be coming up for their meal. But they're going to waste about 10 minutes walking down 14th Street looking for a pizzeria or a sandwich shop. It would really be nice if they had their meal waiting for them when they came up out of the manhole. And his eyes went wide. He did not say a word, but he disappeared into the night. Well, sure enough, 15 minutes later, I heard someone calling a telephone company. And I went out. There was a barrel-chested man in a full white apron with a pad and a pen in his hand, and he introduced himself as Abe Liebewald. I'm the owner of the Second Avenue
Deli. Yeah.
Now, he said, Mr. Schuster sent me up here to take your meal order. So the first thing I said, Abe, what's the budget? He says, he didn't give me one. He just told me to give you guys anything and everything you need.
Oh, my God.
So with that, now don't forget there was 9 of us. With that, the spark went off. I said, I'll need 5 corned beef sandwiches, 5 roast beef sandwiches, 5 briskets of beef, 5 pastrami's, 16 Coca-Colas, 4 7-Ups, 16 coffees, 4 teas, and 20 assorted pastries. About a half hour later, Abe came back with a big cardboard box full of sandwiches with a helper that was carrying 2 smaller cardboard boxes with sodas and coffees in it. And he asked me, he said, should I come back tomorrow to take your order? I said, Abe, just keep it coming as long as Mr. Schuster allows you to deliver it. Bring the same thing. So anyway, after about 42 days of 12 on, 12 off, 7 days a week, we were pretty much zombies. But boss came out and said, all right, next week they're going to allow everybody to take a day off. And we cheered. But you can't all take the same day off. For job continuity, only one man can leave the manhole per day. And I got stuck with Tuesday. But I remember going home at 1:30 a.m. on Tuesday morning, taking a shower, eating a meal, getting into a warm bed, and I probably slept 12 hours straight. It was the best sleep I'd gotten in months. And then we went back to work. The building was up and running by this time, but we were finishing up casing the splices in the manhole, making sure they were airtight, getting ready to shut the manhole down. And when we finally did shut the manhole down, a second wave of minor failures were discovered. You see, when the building went on fire, the compressors went, and all air feeding the underground cables, the pressurization, ideally was about 8 pounds, went to zero. So cables that were in manholes as far away as Washington Square Park in the Greenwich Village failed. It was also a field day for the copper bandits. So in order for us to respond to this second wave of failures, now by this time it was May, and the pressure was off us. The tension wasn't there anymore. So now in July, we reported back to our typical South Bronx fire demolition duties. That was the end of my story as far as the fire goes.
Well, one thing that you had mentioned to me, and we don't have a lot of time left, but one thing that you had mentioned to me before the recording was that this affected people well outside of Manhattan. What did you mean by that?
Well, 13th Street was a major switching station for the whole entire country. So it was a really big trunk switching station, big district. The logistics were incredible. I mean, tens of thousands of telephone employees from one national telephone company, At&T, as far away as California, stopped what they were doing to send their ESS equipment to New York. So there were tens of thousands of people that actually touched something that went to 13th Street. They helped restore service on 13th Street. They had on East 13th Street, the tractor trailers would arrive. They would enter from First Avenue. And there was a gentleman there named Bob Scott. He was a second line manager. And I'll never forget, on his helmet, he had his name, Bob Scott. And underneath it, it had his title, Beachmaster. He knew every tractor trailer, what it was carrying. He told it where to park. He queued everybody in as a matter of priority. I mean, he was incredible. He was always out there in any weather. Now, I was talking to two truckers that had arrived from Arizona. And I told them, I said, wow, you guys made good time getting here. And they said, yeah, well, one of us drove, the other one slept until we got here. So, yeah, Bob Scott, Beachmaster, he was an incredible asset on East 13th Street. Kept everything moving.
Well, it sounds like you did your part, too, and I really the Abe Liebewall part for me, because 2nd Avenue Deli is my favorite deli in New York City. Tommy Steed, I really want to thank you.
Brian, yeah. I'd like to say he was a big-hearted man, Abe, and it really, the only thing about that fire, that tragedy, he was a Holocaust survivor.
Well, I mean, that's something that you'll hang on to forever, and I'm sure that because of what you said, tens of thousands of people who are listening to this, they had their part too.
Oh yeah, they sacrificed all their equipment.
Tommy, thank you so much for coming in, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, Brian, bye-bye.
Thank you so much.